Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would answer a question I had, and actually it was more than one person. A couple of people had very similar questions about this. And when I have two or three different people who are asking the same question, it's probably a real good idea to go ahead and consider making a video on it. And it was, Jason, why do you prefer the Good Morning over the Romanian Deadlift? Why are you doing it? Why do you prescribe it? And I want to be clear on this. I don't think the Romanian Deadlift is a bad tool. I do actually prescribe it for some of my clients. Not all of them, not most of them, but some of them actually do it. So I don't want people to think that I am hating on this exercise or that I think that it isn't a valuable tool. I just think that the good morning is generally, with some exceptions, a better tool. The reason for it is we're doing a hip hinge. The Romanian deadlift to me is usually just useful for people who I want to do a hip hinge for volume to help build their hamstrings and stuff up, in which I want extra grip training. So because of that, people would ask, well, wait a minute, so what about with straps? Well, I think the Romanian deadlift with straps is pretty well a useless exercise because I could just do a good morning instead. And someone had said, but Jason, you can do more weight with the Romanian deadlift. Well, that's the problem. That is the problem. We are using more weight. Using more weight without any additional muscle stimulus in the muscles you're trying to work is not necessarily useful. And it's only because you have a leverage advantage, right? The weight is closer to your body. With a good morning, it's further up and the lever arm of your back is further out. Now, what that means is that we get more work on the upper back with a good morning, with the same amount of work generally in the hamstrings, the glutes, all of that. So what is it we're trying to do with the Romanian deadlift? Generally, people like the Romanian deadlift because it has a stretch reflex in the hamstrings, right? It gets a real good stretch reflex in the hamstrings. We can get that stretch overload. We can get some additional hamstring hypertrophy with an exercise that we can handle more volume of than, say, a traditional deadlift. So therefore, it makes it a really useful tool for bringing up your hamstrings. It's actually a pretty good hamstring exercise. Pretty good glute exercise too, right? Actually, a decent erector exercise. It's good exercise. And if you're doing it without straps, it's not bad for extra grip training. So it's a pretty good exercise, but I generally only use it for people who need the extra grip work and they don't have time to throw in extra grip training. Right? If I have someone who I think early on in their training could use the extra grip work, we'll do some Romanians. But I still am going to have them do some good mornings. Probably going to have them do both. Because I prescribe the good morning to all my clients. So why? Because it's a lighter weight with the same amount of muscle activation. It's slightly easier to recover from. We can do more sets of it. I have no problem throwing 8 to 10 sets of good mornings every single week in most of my clients. We have no issue doing this. It's not a problem at all. They can handle it, even for high reps, and we generally do slightly lighter weight. And the point is that because we can also be very versatile with it, it's an exercise that works really well for light weights. We can get a lot of low back training in because more often than not, when I get new people who come to me, they usually don't have a lot of work capacity in their low back. And if you don't have a lot of work capacity in your low back, it means you haven't built a lot of the capillary beds there. You haven't built up all these things that we need for recovery. So therefore, I can't throw a lot of volume of training with heavier lifts. This is a better tool for building that work capacity there. And we get equal stimulation of the hamstrings. Because look at the way I'm doing these good mornings right here, and then look at a Romanian deadlift. We are getting the same amount of stretch reflex. And more often than not, if we reach failure, if you're going to do a wider stance like I'm doing, the hamstrings oftentimes become the limiting muscle. Because it does put that powerful stretch reflex there. Right? And it's still working your erectors, still working your whole back. We're getting all these things in. We're getting them in. And as far as the other stuff goes, what does the Romanian deadlift bring to the table? The grip training. Now, I had someone say, but it's going to work the traps more also. Not really. I mean, realistically, sure, it will work traps more than this will. But it's not a good trap exercise. It's not really any better than a deadlift. It's not going to compete with a row or an overhead press because you're just holding everything isometrically. It's an isometric hold for the traps, but it's an isometric hold with a much lighter weight than you're going to use on a traditional deadlift. If you really wanted to get some serious trap work in, we would be doing something that's dynamic in nature. If you wanted a big compound that maybe didn't hit them as the main focus, we have overhead pressing, we have rows, we have things like that that are actually moving the traps dynamically. And if you really, really were focused on your traps, you just go ahead and do some shrugs. But the Romanian deadlift doesn't really bring that much special to the table for traps. It just really doesn't. It's not a phenomenal trapezius exercise. It's a phenomenal hamstring exercise. It's actually a really good spinal erector exercise, right? It's actually really good for those. It's not a great trap exercise. So the benefit I see to it is generally just extra grip training. It's extra grip training. But when it comes to versatility and volume, the good morning brings more to the table. Because we can do a lot more training volume. And if you can do more training volume because you can recover from it easier, that's what we're talking about. I mean, what are we generally dealing with? What limits the amount of volume we can do when we start talking about really high volumes of training? You know, we talk about these things of, well, yeah, we get more growth and more training volume, and it seems to scale infinitely off of diminished returns, but until the point to where recovery becomes an issue. Well, we're not just dealing with local recovery, we're dealing with systematic recovery. Good morning is very, very low in terms of systematic recovery because it's just not that heavy of a weight. We're using a really light weight as far as what the spine is experiencing, and we're just moving it through a very long range of motion. Okay, because of where the weight is set, we're using a much lighter weight through a real long range of motion. And it's versatile because we can do different foot positions very effectively. It's very hard to change your foot position very much for a Romanian deadlift to customize the needs. You're going to have basically shoulder width or close to. It's going to be harder to go wide because of the bar getting in the way. Right? The bar gets in the way. With certain positions like what I'm doing here, you might find the bar hitting your knees. So you can't always space it out to get different parts of the hamstring the way and to get a certain stretch we might get with a good morning. You're limited to a narrower footing. With a good morning, we can do both. We can do different stances depending on what we need. We can use different bars. All right, that brings a lot of versatility. We can shift the bar we're doing. We can use specialty bars on good mornings. We use specialty bars on good mornings to get different strength curves. So if we want more erector and stuff, we can hit more erector and a little less hamstring. Or more T-spine because we use a different bar. It's also easier to mess with things like bands, and because all of you are going to have bands. Anyone who's serious about their training is going to own a set of bands, okay? Because they're so versatile. Not everyone's going to have chains. It's a lot easier to mess with different band work for this than it is a Romanian deadlift, because Romanian deadlift kind of has its own little unique range of motion, different to set up. It's easier to set up bands and things for the good morning. Brings a lot to the table, and I do have clients who do banded good mornings. I have clients who don't use plates. I have at least one client with a history of really, really serious back strains and cramps who doesn't have access to, say, certain benches like reverse hypers or hyperextensions or anything. He doesn't have a cable station or anything like that because he has a home gym. He's got bands. He's got a barbell and rack, plates. He's actually got a couple specialty bars. So we do very, very high rep good mornings against bands. We wrap them around the barbell. Hey, that brings us a lot of versatility. It's a very versatile tool. So what we have is an exercise that gives a really unique stretch reflex. There's only a couple exercises share, like the Romanian deadlift for the hamstrings. That's versatile, that we can do very, very large volumes of training from and recover from because of the nature of the exercise. So it's a big, heavy compound that by the nature of it forces us to use a lighter weight to get the same amount of muscle stimulation in several of the primary movers. All right, we can handle high volumes. And that's what we're dealing with. And we're dealing with hypertrophy exercises like this to where we're just focused upon the muscle mass they add where we want it. The ability to do the highest training volumes with the lowest systematic recovery is a massive benefit. That makes it advantageous over the Romanian deadlift. Now, I will come back around and say, yes, if you want extra grip training, you need extra grip training. The Romanian deadlift would actually be possibly a better choice than this, up until the point to where your grip is becoming an issue, in which case you're going to want to do more sets with this. So I tend to prescribe this. I tend to use this. It's the direction I go. But I'm still pointing out the Romanian deadlift has its place, and it's still a very valuable exercise. And see, that's the difference. When we're dealing with picking an exercise for a given role or what we're doing, we can say that, hey, I generally think this exercise is better than another, while still accepting that the other is a good exercise, it's a good tool, and it has its place. People seem to oftentimes have these dogmatic, it's either this exercise or that. Well, they both might actually have a valuable place in your toolbox, just that one of them you're going to use way more often than the other. Okay? Doesn't make either one of them a bad movement. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.